Welcome, everyone. And this is a special podcast because Guy Standing is back with us again today with my regular co-host, Annabelle Lambert. Annabelle, say hello.
Hello.
And Guy is a prolific figure in the sphere of basic income, of universal basic income, and an academic and an author and a professor and an economist and I don't know what else. But we're back today on the show to talk about his most recent book, which is only a couple of months old, I think now when we're recording this, called The Politics of Time. And although my literary critique counts for nothing, it just blew me away and was the best of all of the books that I've written. It's bang up to date. And I would like Guy not to introduce himself because he needs no introduction, but we're just going to get straight into the book. Why did you write it, Guy? Just talk a little bit about, and please forgive our interruptions because Annabelle and I will have to interrupt.
Well, I always say that writing a book is, in a sense, an act of vanity. You have to have a sense of humility. Why should anybody want to read a book by me? I mean, that you have to be well grounded. I've been on a lifelong project, if you like, in the sense that I believed that what we call the neoliberal economics revolution of the 1970s and 1980s, associated with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and the Mont Pelerin Society, which will mean something to economists if there are any listening, was going to usher in a period of rising inequalities, rising economic insecurity, and a new class structure that has in fact emerged. And I was writing at that time saying that we need to realize that this is a transformation taking place and that the old social democratic model consensus of the post-war era associated with Beveridge and the welfare state and the trade unions and all of those big industrial institutions had broken down irretrievably. We were in a global economy, and the new phenomenon in the background that was bound to grow was economic uncertainty. And the subtitle of this particular book is called Gaining Control in the Age of Uncertainty. Now, for an economist, uncertainty is not like risk or conventional forms of insecurity, for which you can have a social insurance system, you can have institutional mechanisms, and you can calculate the probability of a negative effect and therefore build in ex post compensation systems. With uncertainty, it's about unknown unknowns. It's about people facing situations where they lack resilience and they lack robustness, a sense that you could be hit by a shock, a negative effect at any time, but you can't predict it. And actually, The Economist, with which I don't often agree ideologically, actually came out with a good term, which is that this is the age of predictable unpredictability, and that's another way of saying. Now, this has affected the precariat, the growing mass class that I've written about, and I would say that now we're in a situation where in most countries, 40% of the people are in or around the precariat, experiencing chronic insecurities, chronic uncertainty, and not having the institutional safeguards and the means to give them security or freedom or a decent life. And actually, since I wrote the book, The Precariat, which first came out in 2011, and the new edition has come out fairly recently. It's come out in 5 editions. It's been translated into 24 languages. And that doesn't happen to a boring economist like me. But it's led to me giving about 500 speeches in 41 countries. And every single day I receive emails about the precariat and from people who say, hey, this is about me. This is about me. And one of the things that I've been really concerned about is the loss of the commons. The loss of the commons, which right the way through our history has been the bedrock of society. It goes way back to the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest. I think I talked about that earlier, where the rights of commoning, the rights to exist and have the commons to provide you with security and the means of survival, in extremis or not, has always been part of our social structure. And if you look back through history of Britain, and you find this in other countries in different ways, if you look back through our history, all the great revolts and protests and rebellions have been about the defense of the commons, trying to recover the commons. Goes way back to 1216, the Battle of Lincoln, through the Peasants' Revolt, through the Kett's Rebellion, through the Civil War, and through the Chartists of the 19th century, all the way through. And it goes up to the Occupy movement, even in a sense. And the commons has been deprived because we have had an ideology of privatizing and austerity, cutting our commons. Our commons includes all our parks. There are 27,000 parks in Britain, and they've all been mismanaged, cut back. Part of them have been sold, turned into eventism and all that sort of stuff. It's the same with libraries. We've lost hundreds and hundreds of libraries that have been closed. They were part of our commons. The National Health Service was created in 1948 as part of our commons. And it's being gradually shredded and privatized by stealth. And I could go on there. But the one thing that came through looking through the development of what I'd call rentier capitalism and the loss of our commons goes back to my early work on labor markets. We don't have a healthy approach to time. Now, obviously, Seneca was 100% right, and I cite him in the book. Time is our most precious asset after our health, okay? Yet we don't have a politics to liberate time, to give a redistribution of free time. Time is one of the most unequally distributed assets in society. If you're in the plutocracy or even in the salariat with full-time employment and pensions and all that stuff, you have control of your time. If you're in the precariat, you don't have any control of your time. You have to do what you need to do. You have to respond to what bureaucrats say or what parents say or what landlords say or what employers say. You don't have control. And one of the terrible things that I try to highlight in the book is our concepts, our official statistics, are designed for an industrial age way back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So many of the things that the precariat have to do work for labor, don't get measured or recognized. If you're in the precariat, you have to do a hell of a lot of activities for which you don't get remunerated, they don't get accepted, they don't get any sort of recognition, but their work. Often people have to apply for hundreds of jobs just to get one interview. All that time, you think that's leisure? Of course it isn't. They have to fill in numerous forms. They have to queue. They have to do things that they don't want to do because some bureaucrat in the Department of Work and Pension says if you don't do that, you're going to lose your benefits. All of these things add up to a picture where we don't have any sense of control of time and we have unequal time. And then an outcome of all that is an acute pandemic of stress, acute morbidity associated with people feeling they have no control of their lives. This is a sort of basics of our modern society. And in the background, you have the panopticon state growing with algorithms and control surveillance systems, prying into our private lives and so on, which is growing exponentially. And we all know it. But if you're in the precariat, you're at the end of the line and you have fear all around you. And this is a reality which is leading to suicides, it's leading to body harm, it's leading to opioids, it's leading into extremism in populism. And we're seeing it not just in Britain, we're seeing it all over Europe and seeing it in the United States and so on. So for me, time is a new prism to look at the challenges of our era.
Okay, so I hope I'm not going to derail you too much. You talk about the difference between work and labour, and I find that we're in a collective consciousness where we've almost lost the ability to differentiate work and time. We kind of use those words interchangeably, but it wasn't always like that, was it? In terms of if we look back in history, it wasn't always the case that when we said work, we actually meant labour. That exchange. So could you start by just helping us understand what you mean by work versus labour, and then just the picture of how we got here, how we've got to this position where we seem to have lost the differentiation. I think that's a really key part of this time poverty, particularly precariat or universal credit, or what we're doing with people who are furthest away from the labour market. Work and time, what's the difference?
Well, the book begins, as you know, with a chapter differentiating the concepts of time. It goes back to the ancient Athens, and the ancient Greeks had a much more sophisticated approach than the modern utilitarians that have dominated modern economics. Essentially, labor was done for exchange value. It was done by the slaves, the metics, the banosoi. I'm not defending that, but conceptually, it was a difference. The citizen didn't do labor. He tried to avoid labor. And the difference between labor, which was painful, onerous activity, and work, which was done around the home with your friends and your family and relatives. For praxis was the term. And that was done for use value. You did work because you wanted to improve the basic standard of living of you and your family and your friends and so on. And those two concepts were separate from the notion of recreation, which we all need, which is the activities that preserve the body health and keeps our physique and the rest of it, and relaxation, from leisure. And the Greeks had this concept of schole or skole, which was a very nice term combining public participation in the life of the polis, in society, and education. And I didn't expect to be writing a book on this subject, but my publisher has pushed me to do so, about the education commons. And the education commons was that education was for its own sake. It was for the citizenship. It was for the search of truth, the search to be moral. It wasn't to advance you economically. That's a peculiar perversion of the 20th and 21st centuries. Education was to make you a better person and to be able to live in a community. So this sense of Schole was very rich and clear. The ancient Greeks, if they saw our education system today, would be absolutely aghast and disgusted. Absolutely disgusted. We talk about human capital and being more competitive. I mean, it really is shocking decline of understanding of what education should be all about. And I think that helps explain why political populism and the likes of Boris Johnson, who can lie through his teeth, become acceptable. I mean, we should not be accepting people who tell lies and lie, because morally we should be better than that. Anyhow, put that aside. The additional concept which the Greeks developed, Aristotle, was ergia. And ergia meant literally idleness. Okay? Idleness and contemplation. He and the others around him said this is a necessary, vital part of using your time. And this goes forward with Cato's later statement, which I quoted in the book. Never is a man more active than when he's doing nothing. And that we've lost, because if person is doing nothing today, they're called a scrounger, idle, all sorts of rude names, and they're treated as people who should have the benefits taken away and all that stuff. But you need a sense of contemplation, slowing down, a sense of reflection, and the ability. Now, for me, that set of concepts sets the tone for the whole book, but for one additional concept. And that evolved, and I show it, I hope, in the chapter on agrarian time, and then later, which is commoning. The activity of commoning. Commoning is shared activities, shared work, with a sense of the reciprocity built into it, a sense of nature, human interaction on the basis of respect for nature and reproduction. That is a vital set of activities because it reinforces our respect for nature. And we've lost that because in the course of subsequent history, the elites said labor is the thing that everybody should be doing. Jobs is everything people should be doing. Idleness is disgraceful. Education must be functional for the labor market and for growth. And we don't appreciate work. So then the measurement of GDP, for example, our economic growth, care work, unpaid care work is given a value of 0. Now, if you're a Martian coming down, or if you were an ancient Greek coming back, you would say, what madness is that? It's the most valuable form of work. You need it. But we in modern society gives a value of 0.
Yeah.
This is
I mean, I'm giving an example of, if you're a mother, a parent, a father, with a child, you look after your child, it has a productivity and GDP value of 0. If you actually
Correct.
gave your child away to a care home and created a job by doing that, actually the country would say, well done, that's, GDP.
Hey, that's growth up.
It's
Starmer
genius.
and Trust and others would be very happy. I mean, but I mean, I don't want to have a society in which we force all women to do care work. That's ridiculous. It's a matter of saying people should have the choice and the capacity to make their decisions themselves to what they want to do. Okay? And I think some feminists have lost the plot when they say everybody should be in jobs, women should be in jobs. Why? I mean, if they choose to do something that they wish to do, what's wrong with that? And so for me, this whole question of time and the way we've treated it leads up to the modern era and then what I call tertiary time, where we've lost control of time and all these activities are crowding into each other. So you can't actually measure how much time people are spending on labor because quite a lot of activities are taking place around it. And our labor statistics are just rubbish. Just rubbish.
So in the chronology, where did we go wrong? Was it Taylorism? Was it Adam Smith? Was it where could you chart a particular moment or six that was an inflection point in this sort of move over historic time to this obsession that we have for labour, GDP,
I think I
productivity?
think I think the point that I try to make central to the analytical chapters of the book is that there were conflicts in each of the three eras. In agrarian time, there was a strong push to have commoning and to have control over work, whereas landlords and the estates and so on were trying to push people into jobs, into labor. And this was a conflict which, led to the peasants' revolts and things like that. In the industrial regime, it was that overwhelmingly labor was what the establishment, what capital wanted, and everybody should be in jobs. I think a key inflection point was the middle of the 16th century with the vagabondage acts that I cite, where were remarkable. 100,000 people were hanged simply because at the first offense, if they were found not to be doing labor, they were branded with a V. And the second offense, they were hanged. Okay. And a series of these vagabondage acts
By the way,
resulted.
for the absence of doubt for listeners, this is not a policy suggestion for the
Right. But it was actually done. It was actually done. And that you asked for inflection points.
yeah.
And I think that was a period when the state went mad in the interest of forcing people into labor. Then you had the whole 19th century gradually developing through mass production, through the development of factories, and the stories I outline there, which was gradually dragooning people into the industrial time system. The industrial time system was ruled by the clock. In the agrarian regime time, was not ruled by the clock. It was ruled by the seasons, the type of activity, etc. But then with the factory system, the clock came into
Yeah.
predominance,
Yeah.
and the rules of blocks of time. You got up in the
Mm.
morning, you went to the
Mm.
factory, you got home, had a bit of
Clock
sex if
on,
you still had
clock
some
off.
energy,
Yeah.
and clocked out for the night. You had the brief period of schooling if you were fortunate in a sense. Then you had a long period of labor, and then you dropped dead. Okay, that
Yeah.
it was blocks of time. That period got extended with Taylorism in the early 20th century. It was extended by Henry Ford. It was extended with Toyota and through the chapter on
Amazing.
on industrial time. And then you had the breakdown of that. And the tertiary time is where we have this invasion. The boundaries of activities have become blurred, and that is where we are today. And this, of course, is increasingly dominated by IT and the new AI stuff that's creating new phenomenon. But the precariat knows that it is the recipient of this loss of control of what we do. This is what we were talking about earlier. So you've got different inflection points to answer your question, but you can see that the evolution of the time regimes, of course, there's residual parts of each one still with us, but essentially the central theme is we now live in an era of tertiary time.
Yeah, and linking that back to your opening remarks on why time, where you were, I believe, talking about economists and uncertainty. People. There's a vocabulary now, a polycrisis, a meta crisis, a sort of crisis of crisis, where we seem to have developed a system where whatever we're trying within the system is just breeding more of the system rather than any hope of sort of getting out of it. I want to maybe just give you an opportunity for anything else in terms of the summary of the book before we get to the final chapter, because I think that there's a unusually for your work, this is not just an academic sort of here we are actually in this. You offer a final, without doing complete spoiler alert, because I'd like people to read it, but anything else on the lead up to the final chapter, because then I would like you to kind of just give this hopeful finish to this in talking about what's next.
Yeah, I mean what leads up to the final chapter is what I call the laborist uh, options that have been touted or tried in the last 20 years. And people have proposed responses, and I look through those: wage subsidies, a job guarantee scheme. A job guarantee scheme for me would be an authoritarian road to nowhere. Uh, the 4-day week, which is probably would have been an interesting, much more interesting thing in industrial time system than it is, when probably it'll result in people in the precariat ending up doing more work for labor and less paid work. But they'll still have a 4-day labor, but they'll have to do full-time work. And various other schemes that have been mooted. And then it says basically jobs and the jobs fetish are a dead end. And why do we want to push everybody into jobs? Jobs. Are we unable to imagine a good society where the jobs fetish is not the overarching guide? I've never worked harder since I stopped having a job.
Yes,
So there is no, you know, uh,
snap.
you can do many forms of work that aren't jobs. Why do we have to drive people into useless jobs? My old friend David Graeber called them bullshit jobs, but whether they're bullshit or not, don't pretend that people get their happiness from jobs. That's not why they're created. And therefore to pretend that we get our happiness from jobs is flying against the reality for millions and millions of people, that they long for Friday. If they love their job so much, why is it they thank God it's Friday, etc. And so I think our imagination has been held back by a fetish of economic growth. Growth. What is the point of more guns? More. I mean, why do we want to produce more guns? But that's what growth is often about, right? And the same with jobs. Why do we want to push everybody into cleaning public toilets? This is. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people have to do jobs that are things that we would love to avoid in any way possible, and we would hate for our children or our friends to be doing such jobs. So I'm all in favor of automating as many of those boring, disgusting jobs as possible, as soon as possible. So
And
then,
what I think was very inspiring, just to reflect this back to you, is that you're able to kind of look at political policy in a fairly in a raw way that kind of looks at whether it's on the left or the right or the up or the down, and just go, well, actually, does this? Can I stand back from this, and does it make sense? And I think that people who know you, either on the left or the right or the up or the down. It doesn't, you're able to kind of look at things in a fairly naked fashion and kind of like, what is this? And I think that is that's quite a rare skill. You don't seem to be following a particular tribe of thinking, although unless we talk about basic income, but that's a different subject.
Well, it's not. It's related, Robert. It is. I mean, that's been my lifelong crusade, and it comes through, I hope, in this final chapter.
So here we go. Right. So
we set that one up.
Didn't we?
This better
be good. Okay. But, so I felt the tone of your work was different to your previous work, and the final chapter takes us on a journey of what it could be like in quite a engaging way of kind of looking at policy suggestions and ideas, and also sort of, do you want to run us through where that came from, where it's very positive, very optimistic, very hopeful. So where did that chapter come from? Was it?
I think all the elements of that final chapter are things I've emphasized in different contexts in previous work. There's a difference of emphasis that it hinges very much on wishing to produce a vision of a good society in which we have control of our time, in which we can have a slow time movement, a sense of leisure in the Greek sense, and in which we can be emancipated in ways that enable more and more people to feel they have control of the time they have on this planet. And I think that is the instigator of the vision, if you like. But the practical part of it stems in part from my enormous respect for William Morris. And he wrote this book, News from Nowhere, which he wrote it in the 1890s. And he was responding to a vision that had been produced by an American, Bellamy, which was basically about reducing labor time. Okay? And William Morris was wise enough to realize that was not changing the nature of work or the way we used our time. And he wrote News from Nowhere, which was pitched in 1956. His book imagines British society, and particularly around the Thames, set in 1956. And there's been a revolution in his vision, and he has this vision of how people would be living in the 1960s. Of course, it's never come about, but I liked the sense in which William Morris, who was, famous for his artwork and his designs and his poetry, and as well as being a very radical person in his old age, and I wanted to say, okay, imagine we had a political miracle.
Yes.
I'm afraid to call it.
Yes.
A political miracle in which we have an election coming up, which is not won decisively by any particular party, and results in the need for another election and a new alliance, what I've called a political alliance, progressive alliance. And that progressive alliance has this agenda, agree on this agenda, a transformational agenda. And I must say
on that point. So recently, I read a LinkedIn blog from a chap called Ray Dalio, who is the founder of biggest hedge fund, and he said, look, in America, I really believe that we are heading for some form of civil war, some form of geographic uprising and collective discontent because of the dysfunction, unless either Biden or Trump or both of them hopefully get replaced by coalition making moderates, people that can and so you might, as an observer from the outside, look at Guy Standing and look at Ray Dalio and say, look, there are two people from the total opposite side, actually saying that some miracle of coalition forming happens to actually rethink the way forward. And I see in conversations, just observing in many places. So you might be right, because it's not going well at the moment, is it, for the Conservatives, certainly. But what is going to happen? So anyway, this miracle happens, some coalition.
Well, I think that's, Robert. That's a good set of points you just made, because we are at a transformational crisis point where, reminiscent of the crisis point that Karl Polanyi talked about in his book, The Great Transformation of 1944. The transformational point is that when the insecurities and inequalities in society reach extreme levels, we could go either way. We could go to a new era of fascism, and Polanyi saw that as the outcome, the threat of the annihilation of civilization. That's what the term he used. Or we could get a new progressive agenda and vision. Now, the tragedy of history teaches us that, unfortunately, moving to the former tends to precede moving towards the latter. And of course it did in the 1930s, when any sort of progressive vision was snuffed out and we had lurched at Nazis and Bolsheviks and all of the authoritarian eras, and we all know the story. Well, Dalio and people like him are singing off a strange song sheet, is that they are the current beneficiaries individually of this extreme inequality. They're the plutocrats. I have had the strange experience of being invited across to Silicon Valley and Los Angeles and to Davos and places like that, talking to them, arguing with them. Okay. And it's very interesting, because most of them, when I point out that this is rentier capitalism, extreme rigging of the system in favor of blah, 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 they all openly agree.
Mm-hmm.
They all agree. And I remember one multi-billionaire coming down the aisle, and when I was giving a talk, and he said, "Are you saying the system's rigged in our favor?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I fully agree, and it cannot continue." Okay? It cannot continue. And essentially, what we're having now is a breeding ground for fascism of a modern 21st century variety. And we're seeing that politically. We're seeing it just recently in the Netherlands, a country which I have a lot of familiarity with. Gilders winning. I lived part of my time in Italy, and now Meloni, far-right extremist. We have people like Braverman openly at the top of our political tree. She may have fallen on her sword because she's such a stupid person, but she represents a strand of authoritarian people who are playing on fears. And they're getting the support from what I call the atavists in the precariat. The atavists.
It would be worth just unpicking then the the billionaires' view of a rigged system which cannot continue, and therefore the question is why? Because I think it cannot continue because people surely realise it cannot continue by design, and therefore the both sides of the fence looking for a miracle of coalition is a realization that it cannot continue um, by design more than for an ideal outcome and because the only outcome of where we're going at the moment is not good. Is
Well,
terrible.
the trouble is that they are in a contradictory position in the sense they are making billions out of the system that exists as it exists. And at the same time, some of them realize that they're winning far too much. But it's like playing a game of football. You may disagree with the offside rule, but while you're on the pitch, you have to play with that offside rule. You might like to change it when you're off the pitch. And many of them are honest enough and intelligent enough to know that this is untenable in the longer term, but they're not prepared to do much about it. Some are surreptitiously feeding funding to some cause or other, but institutionally and constitutionally, if you like, they're not the people who are going to lead in a better direction. But I think it's interesting that you get divisions there, and the frightening prospect as we sit here talking is that Donald Trump could become an elected dictator in November next year.
Mhm.
And he says he would be a dictator.
At least for a day. Yeah.
For a day. But
Mm.
the day may be too long because he
Yeah.
tried that one day, if you remember, on January the 6th. So he would go after people in a way, just like a mafioso character. And the fact that it's a possibility, the fact that we could have even more authoritarian migration laws and refugee treatments, and universal credit is being tightened and lowering benefits and penalizing the very people who need to be helped. This is an agenda that
So
has a
let's
horrible
get back to the miracle, because I do want to give
Yep.
some time to universal credit and the DWP and the policy objectives. So we find ourselves in the final chapter with a miracle and a coalition, and people come together with some policy suggestions. So do you want to talk us through your thinking and how, just build the story on that piece?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I think would be needed, and that is undertaken in this new era that arrives in chapter 8, is to establish a growth transformation commission. And what that would be charged to do is to redefine what we mean by economic growth. The mindless pursuit of GDP is something that has become a modern fetish. Starmer says that if Labour is elected, his priority will be growth, growth, growth. Liz Truss said the same thing. Sunak says the same thing. Their priority. Well, if you say your overwhelming priority is economic growth, everything else is secondary, you are sort of saying that you can dispense with ecological safeguards, you can dispense with helping people care for themselves and their families and children, because that's not contributing to GDP growth. And we should remember that GDP was a measure developed in the 1930s as an index of what were mobilizable resources for war. Okay? That was what it was developed for by a man called Simon Kuznets, and I mentioned that in the book. So we should be saying that what is it that we want to increase? What is it? Growth. A tumor is a growth inside us. I'm not so keen on having a tumor and encouraging its growth. I mean, why make a fetish of growth? It sounds sort of masculine and virile and the rest of it, and we all know. But it is a pathetic. It is pathetic, because basically we should be thinking, what would make a good society? What should be the indexes of a good society? And the term I like is, we need an economics of enough. We need an economics which says, okay, what are the things that we value? What would we wish to see increase? And that may well be to the detriment of GDP growth. For example, one of the things I propose in this chapter, which is maybe very mundane to some people, is that we need to increase allotments. We have lost 100,000 allotments. Allotments are a wonderful form of work. You produce fruit and vegetables, you exchange with your neighbors, you are sharing the activities, you are close to nature. It's work. But currently, if you go and do some work on your allotment, you are lowering economic growth. How dare you? I mean, it's ridiculous. Okay? It's ridiculous. So I'm proposing that they should be a movement, and that this would be introduced by the PAG, the Progressive Alliance, for have an increase in the number of allotments of 50,000 a year. We gradually build up, restore the number of allotments.
And especially given the population of cities, where many people do not have access to green spaces, that actually, as a baby step to reintegration with nature, it's far from a silly suggestion.
Yeah. And the same with community gardening and the permaculture. That set of themes that's in the chapter, I mean, it's not revolutionary. It's something perfectly sensible. It's something, the waiting list for allotments today is frighteningly large. Thousands and thousands of people are on waiting lists for years before they can have any chance of getting a small piece of land in which they could produce fruit and vegetables. And it's a socialized activity. It's the same with care. So part of the agenda is that the new government sets up a care commission to legitimize all forms of care, to give voice for the care providers and care recipients and the intermediaries, because they're all exploited today and all vulnerable. And I have a 97-year-old mother-in-law who requires 24 hours care from 3 carers. Okay? It costs me a fortune, but they're vulnerable. One of them could easily be thrown out of the country because of visa problems, etc. But they're doing fantastic work. Okay? But no one is speaking up for them. No one is defending their interests. They could get a bad employer, as it were, or a good one. They are vulnerable. And it's the same with people who are receiving care. They don't have a voice. They too could be exploited and oppressed by the caregiver or by somebody else who's paying the caregiver, whatever. We don't have a system in which care is treated as a respected, vital service that we all want to give and all want to receive at all stages of our life, okay? Most men are happy recipients of the care from their partners. We take it for granted. I hope we don't, but that's the tendency. So we need to reposition care, and that's part of the vision of this PAG that I think is very, very important. And of course, that leads to what is fundamental to the whole book, which is we need to enable people to have control of their time and to have a sense of security And that's why I firmly believe in a basic income, moving in the direction of a basic income. In your paper that you've provided, you're saying that you don't expect it to be a wholesale amount overnight. Of course not. Of course it's not going to be. It's important to be on the journey. It's important to be building in that direction. And I've been arguing that for years. That's part of it. The important thing is to be moving in the direction of giving people freedom, moving in the direction of equality of freedom, okay? Moving in the direction of giving basic security, which is a human need when we don't have it today. We don't have people given basic security as a right, all right? And for me, this is fundamental, because if you give people basic security, they start becoming more altruistic. They show more compassion. They show more energy. They show more foresight. They show more caring attitudes. The evidence is overwhelming, okay? You don't have to be Einstein to see the benefits of giving it. I'm technical advisor to a pilot in Wales that Mark Drakeford, the First Minister, launched. He told me he came to one of my lectures years ago and he was a convert to basic income, and he's had the courage to introduce a basic income for care leavers. Okay, the 2-year pilot. Someone tried to write a media story the other day saying it's being wound up and suggesting it was a failure. It's a 2-year pilot, and it's going to go to its fruition. And I'm not in a position to divulge the results, because I've been telling everyone we mustn't give out the results until it's concluded.
However,
but you can watch me. You can watch me. Okay, and I think this gets back to several of the institutional changes that the PAG introduce, and one of those is to decommodify education. Decommodify in the sense that we try to restore the liberal idea of education. That education should be something that improves ourselves as moral human beings, and improves our sense of citizenship, and improves our basic values that have been taken away. I find it enormously disgusting that people can come out of tertiary level education and have values that anybody with a modicum of real education would regard with disgust, whether it's racism or hatred or agreeing with various forms of misogyny and so on. These things should not be the outcome of an education system. We should have an education system that teaches us morality, teaches us the love of art, teaches us feelings of compassion. But these are all marginalized in a society which is giving overwhelming attention to improving your competitiveness in the labor market. Why teach people music and art? That's not going to give them jobs. But if you don't learn about art, you don't learn about your history, you don't learn about your culture, you're going to be an effed person. I left out. But that's basically part of the agenda. We need to rescue the Enlightenment, a new era of enlightenment. And I hope this chapter conveys a realistic road to take.
Wow, wonderful. I could go on and on.
Why has Annabelle been quiet in all of this?
Because I am the quiet one. And I have read
Come on,
the
Annabelle.
book,
Let's
which
hand
is
it over to Annabelle. Go on, good one, guy. Go on.
no,
Come on,
not at
Annabelle.
all. No.
I know you've read
Please,
the
No,
book.
I'm the quiet
Annabelle's
one.
read the book.
No, I have read the book, and I was deeply moved by it, because I feel that personally, I feel a lot of what you described in the book, and as a really poor historian by academic education, it has sort of made everything a reality for me, because I now see that we've just walked our way into this state that we're in, because we've just done these things, those moments of inflection that you talked about, and I mean, particularly on that last point on education, I'm massively moved and motivated, because I feel the future is about more enrichment, more creativity, more art, more music, more engagement with theatre, more expression. I think those, we've almost killed those things in society at the moment, it feels like, by not supporting them effectively, but that they have to have a resurgence, otherwise we lose ourselves in this mess that we're in. is where my thinking is, and I feel that somebody recently we talked to about education, and just about this ridiculousness of squashing everything into 7 years, and making it all about how much knowledge you can retain, and on that it is kills the joy of history, as you just described. I just like I have kids. He'd never do history GCSE because it's like, that's hard work. But he doesn't hate history. He loves it. He loves experiencing it. He wants to know about it. It's not about that. It's just a different thing. But now he'll never do it unless, but he will, because we'll continue to do it, as a family, because I feel it's important. But but anyway, so I've got nothing to add other than support, and wanting to try to bring about some of this change. At least do something to try and take a step in the right direction.
But no final chapter would be complete without highlighting the ills of universal credit, and it's the sort of the behavioural manipulation through economics of people's behaviours to kind of almost achieve the opposite of what we're all talking about here in education, or free time, or liberty.
I think that's a good point, Robert, on which maybe we should end this discussion, in the sense that one of the things that the Progressive Alliance government does is abolish the universal credit and abolish the Department of Work and Pensions and rename it, delegating the payment of benefits to the tax authorities, and having a proper work-oriented ministry that enables people to pursue their dreams and their ambitions and so on. That's what it should be all about. Now, universal credit is the most disgusting social policy in our lifetime, and I'm not exaggerating. It has no respect for the principles enunciated in Magna Carta. If you go along and you're a benefit claimant, and you have a child and you're desperate for money, you go along and you arrive 10 minutes late for that interview, you can have your benefits taken away. Hundreds of thousands of people have been treated that way. This does not follow any legal principle of due process. It's disproportionate punishment, completely disproportionate. You're taking away the means of survival of somebody for being 10 minutes late. Ridiculous. And lots of examples. I'm not exaggerating. There are different things like that. Whereas if the bureaucrat is 10 minutes late, that's time lost by the claimant, but no redress. Okay. Now, that's disproportionate, but it has no respect for due process. Due process is, if you are charged with an offence, You have to be tried independently. You have to have voice representation. You have to have a proper appeal process. In this case of universal credit, you are allowed to appeal after you've been punished, after you've had your benefits taken away. And hundreds of thousands of people over the last few years have eventually won their appeal. A year later, some of them have committed suicide or died from heart attacks or whatever in between. And that indicates that the original decision was wrong. But they've been punished. Now, this is a system which, if anybody defends, they need re-educating, please. Go back and learn basic morality. Okay? And why I'm so angry about that, and there are various other elements that I mention in the chapters, is that there seems to be a lukewarm response, a lukewarm reaction, opposition to what's been going on. Okay? Both all across the political spectrum. I was talking to Caroline Lucas' friend, who's a Green MP. She gets very angry, but within the Labour Party and the Conservative Party and the Lib Dems, they've allowed it to continue. When basic values should tell you they should be furious and oppose it. And we subjecting a minority, and that's why it's utilitarian. They can do that. They can do that because they're not our voters that are getting punished and that having to go to the food banks and the hygiene banks. What sort of state is it when women have to go to hygiene banks? We should all be shouting in fury at these things. And I hope I do.
And I think you have. And I thank you enormously for that high point of this latest podcast. I cannot believe you're on another book already, but this one for me. And we shall see in the forthcoming elections, and maybe Panorama is going to pick up that point when we share this video and do a program on universal credit and its benefits.
Are there any?
But they might not have seen that clip. We need that clip again. But thank
Basic
you.
income will come. Basic income will come.
I think we are at a point where things cannot go on just the same as they have been. Hopefully, we're not going to see another period of fascism before it, but only time will tell. Guy Standing, author of The Politics of Time, his latest book, but there's more to come, he tells us. Thank you so much for sharing. And until the next time, let's all just say goodbye and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.